A philosopher once said that if you had to invent everything here on planet Earth, here south, you would die stupid. The main reason that we are able to have a civilization is we're able to write things down and store knowledge for ourselves and for future generations, and we've been building for quite a while on that. And one of my supporters slash parishioners slash students, I don't know what, Newtopians, I guess, asked me to purchase a duplicate of the most important stuff in my library for her, and I'm in the midst of doing that. And finding some of the more important works are out of print, and very rare, and this is books that were published 100 years ago or less, and they're disappearing. Probably from lack of interest with the onslaught of TV destroying literacy and shunting the minds of the generations X, Y, and Z into electronica. And that reminded me of when you see totalitarian takeovers, they usually book burning, because the psychopaths have managed to convince the sleeping public that it is the intellectuals who are the cause of all their problems. And what fires the intellectuals is the stuff that's hidden in books. So a list of unwanted books is released, and they're pulled out of homes and libraries and burned in the streets amid dancing crowds of joyful sleeping people who are certain they are doing themselves some good and preventing knowledge from harming future young people. There have been book burnings in the U.S. during my lifetime, not to mention the destruction of Beatle records in my lifetime. There was book burning in Europe under the Nazis, and there was book burning during the Middle Ages under the Roman Catholic Empire / Church. And there was the burning of the Library of Alexandria and assorted other destructions of our literature. It's not that this is a new thing. The people who run this place have been here for at least 20,000 years, maybe longer, and their policy is to keep us stupid, keep us meat, and keep us unaware of our true powers and destiny and what's really going on in the universe in general, which is not what is going on here. Now, I've been admonished by my school to avoid the the political situation on the planet and concentrate on spiritual stuff. So I'm going to do that. I have a book here. It was written by a Russian man. And I'm going to read the introduction by him and the introduction by the publisher. But for example, here's on one of the introductory pages a quote from Revelations 10, verse 6. And swear that there should be time no longer. Now this is in here, and it is referring to cosmology, and in the days of the Bible there was a death penalty for having the materials which were taken out of the Bible, which talked about the cosmology. And if you would like to know about time no longer, I would recommend Dan Winter's video series called The History of DNA, where he manages to explain that time is rotating charge. And once you understand that, which he's able to explain, you'll be able to see that time travel is possible. And here's another thing, Paul the Apostle, the Epistle to the Ephesians 3:17-18. That ye, being rooted and grounded in love, may be able to comprehend with all saints what is the breadth and length and depth and height. Easy for him to say because he knows about the cosmology, but if you don't know about the cosmology, this could be interpreted in many ways, and has been to the detriment of our history. And by the author, Peter Uspensky, I have called this system of higher logic tertium, meaning 3, organum, because for us it is the third canon of thought, the third instrument of thought after those of Aristotle and Bacon. The first was organon, the second novum organum, but the third existed earlier than the first. Now the nerve of this guy to say that, however, Peter Uspensky is one of the, if not the main proponent of the release of information from the inner circle of mankind through what's called the Fourth Way School. So he gets to say that, but you wouldn't know that unless you knew something about Peter Uspensky and the Fourth Way Schools. So I'm going to read the author's preface to the second edition to get across the power of his intellect. And this is the kind of book which would be ripe for book burning. And this is the current paperback cover. And I would recommend, if you're serious about finding out what's going on with the universe, and this is not the only universe, it's one of hundreds, if not thousands, get this book and his other books. So I quote the author. In revising Tertium Organum for the second edition in English, my chief concern has been to coordinate its terminology with the more developed terminology of those of my books written after the publication of the second Russian edition of Tertium Organum, from which the English translation was made. Such a unity of terminology is the more necessary because I am obliged to lead the reader into regions of thought and knowledge where boundaries have not been clearly established, and where different authors, and often one and the same author, in different works and during different periods of his activity, have called the same thing by different names, or different things by the same name. It must be admitted that language is a weak and inadequate vehicle for even the expression or a usual understanding of things, to say nothing of those moments when the understanding unexpectedly expands and becomes deeper, and we see revealed an entire series of facts and relations for the description of which we have neither words nor expressions. But quite aside from this, in ordinary conditions of thinking and feeling, we are frequently at a loss for words, and we use one word at different times to describe different things. On the other hand, it is no merit in an author to invent new words, or to use old words in new meanings, which have nothing in common with the accepted ones. To create, in other words, a special terminology. I have always considered that it is necessary to write in the language which men commonly speak, and I have endeavored to do this, although in some cases it has been necessary to make some additions to and corrections of that language for the sake of exactness and lucidity, which means clarity. In due time, I shall separately consider the subject of language and the methods of its adaptation or the transmission of exact thought. For the present, I have reference only to the language of tertium organum. The first word demanding a more careful use is consciousness. In conversational language and in everyday psychology, even in psychology purporting to be scientific, the word consciousness is often used as a term for the designation of a complex of all psychic functions in general, or for their separate manifestations. At present, I have not access to the necessary books. I abandoned them all in Petrograd 4 years ago. But to the best of my recollection, Professor William James defined thought as a moment of consciousness. PUSPENSKY had to leave Russia because of the war, so he had to abandon his literature and notes. From my standpoint, which I saw elucidate in works now being prepared for the press, it is necessary to regard consciousness as distinct from the commonly understood psychic functions, thought, feeling, and sensations. Over and above all this, consciousness has several exactly definable forms or phases, in each one of which thoughts, feelings, and sensations can function, giving in each different results. Thus, consciousness, be it this or something other, is a background upon which thoughts, feelings, and sensations reveal themselves. This background can be more or less bright. But thoughts, feelings, and sensation have their own separate life and can be regarded independently of this background. So can it be regarded and studied independently of them. For the present, I shall not insist too strongly upon the idea of this ground as something separate in its substance from psychic functions. The practical result is the same if we say that thoughts, feelings, and sensations may have a different character, and that thoughts, feelings, and sensations of this or that character create this or that state of consciousness. It is important only to establish the fact that thoughts, feelings, and sensations, i.e., for the sake of an example, psychic functions are not consciousness, and that this or that state of consciousness is something pertaining to them, but separate from them, and in some cases capable of being separately observed. And this is the most important data revealed here. I'm going to reread that because this is why I'm doing this actually. Thus, consciousness is a background upon which thoughts, feelings, and sensations reveal themselves. This background can be more or less bright. But as thoughts, feelings, and sensations have their own separate life and can be regarded independently of this background, so can it, meaning the background, be regarded and studied independently of them. And that is the crux of, quote, work on yourself, is becoming aware of this concept and clearing away the everyday crap that occurs in your mind and taking a look at that background, which is actually the real you. And that is one of the main whys of meditation. There's a lot of crap, BS, false data, imagination, and money to be made from the concept of meditation. However, the bottom line practical use of it is to try to stop the crap that goes on inside of you and take a look at being aware of, noticing what is there when the crap is not, keeping you identified with it. And it's a major aspect of the prison planet slave culture that we live in, that the world, the way it's set up, is designed to keep you identified with sensations. Supposedly we have 6 channels for bringing in information. We actually have 57, which I will list sometime. But those in charge of the world for at least the last 20,000 years have been very deliberately setting things up to keep our attention on the physical. You only have one life. When you die, you go to heaven or hell. You better be good. Those kinds of concepts. Now back to the author's preface. In the early editions of Tertium Organum, I have used the word consciousness in its generally accepted meaning, as a complex of psychic functions, or in the sense of their indications and contents. But as in my future works, it will be necessary for me to use the word consciousness in its real and true meaning. I have tried in this revised text of Tertium Organum to substitute the word consciousness wherever it is used in the sense of a complex of psychic functions, such other words as psyche or psychic life, which perfectly expresses my meaning in such cases. Furthermore, in my work of revision, I have found numerous instances of illustrations, examples, etc., having no direct connection with the main theme. I have found also that some of these introduced themes weaken the correctness of the main line of thought, creating associations which lead too far away. Other themes also accidentally touched upon demand a considerably more extended treatment than can be given them within the limits of this book. But being inadequately developed, they leave a wrong impression. In such cases, I consider it necessary to eliminate this extraneous matter in order to elucidate the principal thoughts more clearly and directly, particularly as some of the questions touched upon, demanding more or different exposition, are discussed at length in my forthcoming books. In conclusion, let me express to Mr. Nicholas Bessarab and to Mr. Claude Bragdon my deep appreciation of their labors on the translation of my book into English. This translation, made without my knowledge and participation, at a time when I was cut off by war and revolution from the civilized world, transmit my thought so exactly that after a very attentive review of the book, I could find only one word to correct. Such a result could be achieved only because Mr. Bessarab and Mr. Bragdon were not translating words merely, but were grasping directly the thoughts back of them. Also, it is especially pleasant for me to remember that a number of years ago, Mr. Bragdon's book, Man the Square, reached me in Petrograd, and that I, not knowing Mr. Bragdon's other works at all, selected this little book from a whole series received from abroad as one which carried the message of a common thought, a common understanding. Peter Uspensky, Constantinople, not Istanbul, Constantinople, June 1921. Now that was written in English by Peter Uspensky. And how good is your English? Could you have written something like that? He's originally Russian, grew up in Russia, went to school, schools there, became a newspaper reporter, and then started going on expeditions to India to try to find out the real scope of things esoteric, and eventually ran into George Gurdjieff and became his principal student along with Rodney COLIN, who has a book. Rodney Colin's book is called The Theory of Celestial Influence, and I think, in my opinion, in my library, it's the most important work there is on the planet, and it is now out of print. Let's put that. So now my copy, in the hands of someone like me who understands what it means, has become a very important and powerful thing. So I'm putting it out on the World Wide Web, hoping that as video killed the radio star, that the World Wide Web will kill the TV monopoly on information. And one of the laws of the game here is once something is put into the game, it can't be taken back out. So I'm putting the Fourth Way School Inner Circle of Mankind information on the World Wide Web, and it cannot be taken back out. For example, another thing like that is nuclear bombs have been introduced here to the game here, so they can't be taken back out. There'll never be a complete nuclear armistice. it just as the irony of the situation. We take all the books on how to make atomic bombs and burn them. Wouldn't that be great? Now I'm going to read the introduction to the English translation. This was done by one of the translators who was also apparently a writer. I never heard of him until now. Claude Bragdon. This is his opinion of the work that they have created here. Just to fill the what I hope is the methought interval here. I received a very nasty email from a university student who's studying physics and cosmology or space or whatever they're calling it these days, saying how dare I malign science for not knowing everything. And I suggested that he read all of these fourth way school books and add it to what he's learning in university and go off and win himself a Nobel Prize. If not in this book, it's in the next one. There was a little diagram of how six-dimensional effects appear in a three-dimensional universe. So I went to MIT, has a series of free science lectures. It was lecture 27 on electromagnetic waves and destructive waves. Very brilliant and kindly instructor. No ego, which is nice. Explaining that they had figured out the behavior of the electromagnetic spectrum because in this one particular case, if you use this one particular set of rules and laws, everything lines up, and they were able to eliminate a lot of the crap by canceling out common factors and equations as we see in science fiction movies. And from this one simple case, they were able to figure out how everything worked, which is brilliant. And these were men like Faraday and the original progenitors of our electrical laws and information. However, if he'd seen this information, he would be able to understand why the particular case works. And he's seeing six-dimensional effects in the three-dimensional universe. But only in one particular case is it easy to see, which is fine. That's what being a human scientist is all about, is finding out, which is finding what is out there. So I'm mentioning that to show the power of this information. This is from the civilization we had before the fall. This is information that is known throughout this universe that people get to use, but we're not allowed to have it because this is not an ideal scene here. On with the introduction. In naming his book Tertium Organum, PUSPENSKY reveals at a stroke that astounding audacity which characterizes his thought throughout. An audacity which we are accustomed to associate with the Russian mind in all its phases. Such a title says, in effect, here is a book which will reorganize all knowledge. The Organon of Aristotle formulated the laws under which the subject thinks. The Novum Organum of Francis Bacon, the laws under which the object may be known. But the third canon of thought existed before these two, and ignorance of its laws does not justify their violation. Tertium Organum shall guide and govern human thought henceforth. How passing strange in this era of negative thinking, of timid philosophizing, does such a challenge sound. and yet it has the echo in it of something heard before. What but the title of another's volume, Hinton's A New Era of Thought? Ouspensky's Tertium Organum and Hinton's A New Era of Thought present substantially the same philosophy, though Hinton's book only sketchily arrived at by the same route, mathematics. Here is food for thought, in the words of Philip Henry Wynne. Mathematics possesses the most potent and perfect symbolism the intellect knows, and this symbolism has offered for generations certain concepts, of which hyperdimensionality is only one, whose naming and envisionment by the human intellect is perhaps its loftiest achievement. Mathematics presents the highest certitudes known to the intellect, and is becoming more and more the final arbiter and interpreter in physics, chemistry, and astronomy. Like Aaron's rod, it threatens to swallow all other knowledge as fast as they assume organized form. Mathematics has already taken possession of great provinces of logic and psychology. Will it embrace ethics, religion, and philosophy as well? In Tertium Organum, mathematics enters and pervades the field of philosophy. But so adroitly, so silently as it were, that one hardly knows that it is there. It dwells more in Ouspensky's method than in his matter, because for the most part the mathematical ideas necessary for an understanding of this thesis are such as any intelligent high school student can comprehend. The author puts to himself and to the reader certain questions, propounds certain problems which have baffled the human mind for thousands of years. The problems of space, time, motion, causality, and of free will and determination. And he deals with them according to the mathematical method. That is all. He has sensed the truth that the problems of mathematics is the problem of the world order, and as such must deal with every aspect of human life. Mathematics is a terrible word to those whose taste and training have led them into other fields. So lest the non-mathematical reader should be turned back at the very threshold, deciding too hastily that the book is not for him, let me dwell rather on its richly humanistic aspect. To such as ask no key to the enigmas of the world, but only some light to live by, some mitigation of the daily grind, some glimpse of some more enlightened polity than that which rules the world today, this book should have an appeal. The author has thrown overboard all the jargon of all the schools. He uses the language of common sense and of every day. His illustrations and figures of speech are homely, taken from the life of every day. He simply says to the reader, "Come, let us reason together," and leads him away from the haunted jungle of philosophical systems and metaphysical theories out into the light of day, there to contemplate and to endeavor to understand those primal mysteries which puzzle the mind of a child or of a savage no less than that of the sophisticated and super subtle ponderer on the enigmas of the world. Not that Ouspensky is a trafficker in the obvious. Far from it. Those who know most, think most, feel most will get most out of his book. But a great sanity pervades his pages, and he never leads away into labyrinths where guide and follower alike lose their way and fail to come to any end. Leaving the average reader out of account for the moment, there are certain others whom the book should particularly interest, if only in the way of repulsion. First of all come the mathematicians and the theoretical physicists, who are already, without knowing it, they have invaded that dark, backward, and abysm of time which the Ouspensky philosophy lights up, and are by way of losing themselves there. That is to say, in certain of their calculations, they are employing 4 mutually interchangeable coordinates, 3 of space and 1 of time. In other words, they use time as though it were a dimension of space. Ouspensky tells them the reason they are able to do this. Time is the 4th dimension of space, imperfectly sensed, apprehended by consciousness successively, and thereby creating the temporal illusion. Moreover, mathematicians are perforce concerning themselves with the magnitudes to which the ordinary logic no longer applies. Ouspensky presents a new logic, or rather he presents a new and ancient logic, the logic of intuition, removing at a stroke all of the nightmare aspects, the preposterous paradoxes of the new mathematics, which by reason of its extraordinary development has shattered the old logic, as a growing oak shatters the containing jar. It is from the philosophic camp, no doubt, that the book will receive its sharpest criticism, on account of the author's lèse-majesté towards so many of the crowned kings of philosophic thought, and its devastating assault on positivism, that inevitable byproduct of our materialistic way of looking at the world. His attempt to prove the Kantian problem, the subjectivity of space and time, doubtless will be acutely challenged, and with some chance of success, because the 2 chapters devoted to this are perhaps the least convincing of the book. But no one heretofore has even attempted to demonstrate absolutely or successfully to controvert the staggering proposition advanced by Kant regarding space and time as forms of consciousness. Whatever the verdict of the philosophical pundits of the day and hour, whether favorable or otherwise, Ouspensky is sure of a place in the hierarchy of philosophers, for he has essayed to solve the most profound problems of human existence by the aid of the binocular vision of the mathematician and the mystic. Starting from the irreducible minimum of knowledge, he has carried philosophy into regions hitherto not explored. To persons of an artistic or devotional bent, the book will be as water in the desert. These, always at a disadvantage among the purely practical-minded, by whom they are overwhelmingly outnumbered, will find in Ouspensky a champion whose weapon is mathematical certitude, the very thing by which the practical-minded swear. These he puts to rout, holds up to ridicule, and applauds every effort to escape into the world of the wondrous. But most of all, Ouspensky will be loved by all true lovers for his chapter on the subject of love. We have had Schopenhauer on love and Freud on love, but what dusty answers do they give to the soul of a lover? Edward Carpenter comes much nearer the mark, but Ouspensky penetrates to its very center. It is because our loves are so dampened by our egotisms, our cynicism, and our cowardices that we rot and smolder instead of bursting into purifying flame. Just as Goethe's Werther, with its sex sentimentality, is said to have provoked an epidemic of suicides. So may tertium organum, which restores love to that high heaven from whence descended every beauty and benison, inaugurate a renaissance of love and joy. From one point of view, this is a terrible book. There is a revolution in it, a revolution of the very poles of thought. Some it will rob of their dearest illusions. It will cut the very ground from beneath their feet. It will consign them to the abyss. It is a great destroyer of complacency. Yes, this is a dangerous book, but then life is like that. It is beyond the province of this introduction either to outline the Uspenskyan philosophy at any length or to discuss it critically. But some slight indication of its drift may be of assistance to the reader. The book might have been appropriately called A Study of Consciousness, for Uspensky comes early to the conclusion that all other methods of approach to an understanding of the enigmas of the world are vain. Chapters 1 to 7 inclusive deal with the problem of the world order by the objective method. The author erects an elaborate scaffolding for his future edifice, and after it has served its purpose, throws it down. Aware of the deficiencies of the objective method and having made the reader conscious of them too, he suddenly alters his system of attack. From chapter 8 onward, he undertakes the study of the world order from the standpoint of subjectivity of consciousness. By a method both ingenious and new, he correlates the different grades of consciousness observable in nature. Those of vegetable, animal, and man, with the space sense showing that as consciousness changes and develops, the sense of space changes and develops too. That is to say, the dimensionality of the world depends upon the development of consciousness. Man, having reached the third stage in that development, has a sense of three-dimensional space, and for no other reason. Uspensky concludes that nothing except consciousness unfolds, develops, and as there appears to be no limit to this development, he conceives of space as the multidimensional mirror of consciousness, and of time and motion as an illusion. What appears to be time and motion being in reality only the movement of consciousness upon a higher space. The problem of superior states of consciousness in which there shall be time no longer is thus directly opened up, and in discussing their nature and methods of attainments, he quotes freely from the rich literature of mysticism. Instead of attempting to rationalize these higher states of consciousness, as some authors do, he applies to them the logic of intuition, tertium organum, paradoxical from the standpoint of ordinary reason, but true in relation to the noumenal world as opposed to the phenomenal world. Joseph Conrad and Ford Madox Huffner once wrote a novel called The Inheritors, and by this they meant the people of the fourth dimension. Though there is small resemblance between Uspensky's Superman and theirs, it is his idea also that those of this world who succeed in developing higher dimensional or cosmic consciousness will indeed inherit, will control and regulate human affairs by reason of their superior wisdom and power. In this, and in this alone, dwells the salvation of the world. His Superman is the just man made perfect of the evangelist. The struggle for mastery between the blind and unconscious forces of materialism on the one hand and the spiritually illumined on the other is already upon us. And all conflicts between nations, peoples, and classes must now be interpreted in terms of this greater warfare between two races of men, in which the superior minority will either conquer or disappear. These people of the fourth dimension are in the world, but not of it. Their range is far wider than the slum of space. In them, dormant faculties are alert. Like birds of the air, their fitting symbol, they're at home in realms which others cannot enter, even though already, in quotation marks, there. Nor are these heavenly eagles confined to the narrow prison of the breast. Their bodies are as tools which they may take up or lay aside at will. This phenomenal world, which seems so real, is to them as insubstantial as the image of a landscape in a lake. Such is the Ouspensky Superman. The entire book is founded upon a new generalization, new that is in philosophy, but already familiar to mathematicians and theoretical physicists. This generalization involves startling and revolutionary ideas in regard to space, time, and motion far removed from those of Euclidean geometry and classical physics. Ouspensky handles these new ideas in an absolutely original way, making them the basis of an entire philosophy of life. To the timid and purblind, this philosophy will be nothing short of terrifying. But to the clear-eyed and steadfast watcher, shipwrecked on this shoal of time, these vistas, overflowing with beauty, strangeness, doubt, terror, and divinity, will be more welcome than anything in life. Fear not the new generalization. Ouspensky's clearness of thought is mirrored in a corresponding clarity of expression. He sometimes repeats the difficult and important passages in an altered form of words. He uses short sentences and short paragraphs and italicizes significant phrases and significant words. He defines where definition is needed and suggests collateral trains of thought with a skill which makes the reader, who is intuitive, a creator on his own account. Schopenhauer has said that it is always a sign of genius to treat difficult matters simply, as it is a sign of dullness to make simple matters appear recondite. Ouspensky exhibits this sort of genius, and that other mentioned by Schopenhauer, which consists in choosing always the apt illustration, the illuminating simile. The translators have tried to be rigidly true to the Russian original, and they have been at great pains to verify every English quotation so far as has been possible. It is therefore a source of great gratification to them that their efforts should have received the unqualified endorsement of the author himself. Claude Bragdon, Rochester, New York, January 31st, 1922. Now, this book is available from Vintage Books, which is a division of Random House. And it's also Library of Congress. Number is 76-128440. Another rare book I have is called The Secret Book of the Egyptian Gnostics. This book is still easily available. It's by Dorès. He's French. It's been translated out of French. And what this is a lot of the stuff that was removed from the Bible about 315 AD by a conference that had to do with the change of the Roman Empire into the Holy Roman Empire / Catholic Church. And realizing it was cheaper to control people with a religion than with armies. So I have 2 videos on this. They're called 54 Coptic books found in a jar. These are like the Dead Sea Scrolls. They were found in a jar buried in the cave. These are some of the books. Luckily the jar was sealed and it was in a very dry desert. So, they managed to survive. It's written in ancient Coptic. And it's a picture of Mr. Dorès, an expert in ancient languages, doing the first translation of these pages. Look at those clothes. This is what's mainly in here is the cosmology that was removed from the Bible at that time, and many other wonderful and delicious pieces of esoterica. So this is another book I would recommend that you can buy and use it to change your personal universe. Anelia Benz said she came here from Source to help with raising the vibration of the planet, and the more people that know the truth of the actual game / matrix that we live within, the more peaceful and less mechanical and materialistic the game will become. So these books are talismans on the way. Across the room here, I have my faithful and well-worn copy of Ethereal Celestial Influence, which I've had for so long I can't remember when I bought it. This is not a print. Rodney Collins, a student of Peter Uspensky, and this is the clearest and most profound revelation of the cosmologies. And as you can see, I've got sticky notes everywhere through this. And this, unfortunately, was way, way, way before computer animation, but it has a picture of the long body of the universe and the this is the body of the sun, an 80-year photograph of the sun as a being. Shortest moment of perception of the sun is 80 of our years of one lifetime of man, and this is what the sun would appear like as a being in the cosmos. And as the life of a human being is approximately 77 years, the sun looking at the earth, it would be covered with these little twinkling little lights, are the lifetimes of men on the earth. So I can imagine the planet Earth to the sun looking like it is glowing with little lights, and not dark blue, but sparkly. Well, this is the new version of Tertium Organum, available at the bookstores. This is published by The Book Tree, San Diego. www.thebooktree.com. And how things change. This is the introduction. This is one of the most important and interesting books written on the subject of religion, science, mysticism, and philosophy. Those who have read it always seem to include it near the top of their best book list, providing they are able to grasp its message. This is Meetings with Remarkable Men by George Gurdjieff. This will rock your world and allow you to think in a new way. In Search of the Miraculous, number 2 book on my list. Absolutely essential that you have this book. If you have that and The Theory of Celestial Influence, you are on your way. PUSPENSKY, A New Model of the Universe. It means exactly what it says. Ram Dass, The Only Dance There Is. Absolutely essential. His other book, Be Here Now. Intellectual Tour de Force, Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson by George Gurdjieff. Huge book. You will never be the same after you read this. This is a book designed to change your psyche, and it does. It's a very hard book to read. I would recommend leaving it for a while. So you know about these concepts. Spensky again, The Fourth Way Schools. Believe it or not, Dianetics by L. Ron Hubbard. The first 50 pages. You need to know what this man had to say. And he is the most attacked man on the planet, so he must have had something to say about freedom. Also, Autobiography of a Yogi by Yogananda. And God Speaks by Meher Baba, which I've been unable to get because it's out of print. These things will rock your world. Seems unusual for literature to be rocking your world, but if you're interested in how I got to be in these books, or Talismans on the Way. So I present them to you now as I'm getting a library together for somebody who's serious about knowing what's going on. Okay, so I'm laughing at one of the phrases in any intelligent high school student. Well, if we had any of those anymore with the way the school system is. And there actually is a book about that called How Nazi Germany Destroyed the American Educational System Without Firing a Shot. It's an actual book. You might check into that. That's also on this list of books. So, not to insult you, but get your dictionary out and start reading and look up any word which seems unfamiliar or looks like it's in a foreign language. Or if you sneeze, that's a misunderstood word. Bye for now.